Hello, welcome to the Short Story Workshop. My name is Matt Bowles. I'm here with Melody Bowles and Simone King. This week we are going to be reading Bearskin by the Grimm Brothers. So, Simone, is there anything you would like to say to introduce us to this story?
So, as you may know, I'm a big fan of fairy tales and I've read a lot of them. But this was one of the few fairy tales that surprised me with the ending, which I really, really enjoyed. But for the sake of spoilers, I will unpack that more later.
Okay, perfect. Here is Bearskin by Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a young fellow who enlisted as a soldier, conducted himself bravely, and was always at the very front when it was raining bullets. As long as the war lasted, all went well, but when peace was made, he was dismissed, and the captain said he could go wherever he wanted to. His parents were dead, and he had no longer a home, so he went to his brothers and asked them to support him until there was another war. The brothers, however, were hard-hearted and said, "What can we do with you? We have no work for you. See that you go and make a living for yourself." The soldier had nothing left but his gun, so putting it on his shoulder, he went forth into the world. He came to a large heath on which nothing was to be seen but a circle of trees. Filled with sorrow, he sat down beneath them and thought about his fate. "I have no money," he thought, "and the only trade I have learned is that of making war, and now that they have made peace they can no longer use me, so I see that I shall starve." Suddenly he heard a rustling sound, and when he looked around, a strange man was standing before him. He wore a green jacket and looked quite stately, but he had a hideous horse's foot. "I know what you are in need of," said the man. "You shall have money and property, as much as you, with all of your might, can squander away, but first I must know if you are fearless, so that I won't be giving away my money for nothing." "A soldier and fear, how can those go together?" he answered. "You can put me to the test." "Very well," answered the man. "Look behind you." The soldier turned around and saw a large growling bear running towards him. "Aha!" shouted the soldier. "I'll tickle your nose until you lose your desire for growling." Then, taking aim at the bear, he shot it in the snout and it fell down motionless. "I see quite well," said the stranger, "that you do not lack for courage, but there is one more condition you will have to fulfill." "If it does not endanger my salvation," answered the soldier, who knew quite well who was standing before him. "Otherwise, I'll have nothing to do with it." "You'll see about that for yourself," answered Green Jacket. "For the next 7 years you are neither to wash yourself, nor comb your beard and hair, nor cut your nails, nor say the Lord's Prayer. I will give you a jacket and a cloak, which you must wear during this time. If you die during these 7 years, you are mine. If you stay alive, you are free, and rich as well, for all the rest of your life." The soldier thought about his desperate situation, and having faced death so often before, he decided to risk it now as well, and he entered into the agreement. The devil took off his green jacket and gave it to the soldier, saying, "Whenever you wear this jacket and reach into its pocket, you will find a handful of money." Then he pulled the skin off the bear and said, "This shall be your cloak and your bed as well, for you are to sleep on it, and you are not allowed to lie in any other bed. Because of your clothing, you shall be called Bearskin." With that, the devil disappeared. The soldier put on the jacket, immediately reaching into the pocket, and found that the promise was really true. Then he put on the bearskin and went forth into the world. He did whatever he pleased, refraining from nothing that did him good and his money harm. During the first year, his appearance was still acceptable, but during the second, he looked like a monster. His hair covered nearly his entire face. His beard looked like a piece of coarse felt cloth. His fingers had claws, and his face was so covered with dirt that if someone had planted cress on it, it would have grown. Everyone who saw him ran away. However, because everywhere he went he gave money to the poor to pray that he might not die during the 7 years, and because he paid well for everything, he always found shelter. In the 4th year he arrived at an inn. The innkeeper would not let him enter, refusing even to let him have a place in the stable because he was afraid he would frighten the horses. However, when Bearskin reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of ducats, The innkeeper softened and gave him a room in an outbuilding. Bearskin, however, had to promise not to let himself be seen, lest the inn should get a bad name. One evening, Bearskin was sitting alone, wishing with all his heart that the 7 years were over, when he heard a loud moaning in a neighbouring room. He had a compassionate heart, so he opened the door and saw an old man weeping bitterly and striking his hands together above his head. Bearskin went nearer, but the man jumped to his feet and tried to run away. At last, hearing a human voice, the man let Bearskin talk to him, and with friendly words Bearskin succeeded in getting the old man to reveal the cause of his grief. Slowly but surely the old man had lost his wealth, and now he and his daughters would have to starve. He was so poor that he could not pay the innkeeper and was to be sent to prison. "If that is your only problem," said Bearskin, "I have money enough." He called for the innkeeper and paid him, and then put a bag full of gold into the poor man's pocket. When the old man saw that he was freed from all his troubles, he did not know how to show his gratitude. "Come with me," he said to Bearskin. "My daughters are all miracles of beauty. Choose one of them for your wife. When she hears what you have done for me, she will not refuse you. You do look a little strange, to be sure, but she will put you in order again." This pleased Bearskin well, and he went with the old man. When the oldest daughter saw him, she was so terrified at his face that she screamed and ran away. The second one stood still and looked at him from head to foot, but then she said, "How can I accept a husband who no longer has a human form? The shaved bear that once was here and passed itself off for a man pleased me far better. At least it was wearing a hussar's fur and white gloves. If ugliness were his only flaw, I could get used to him." The youngest one, however, said, "Father, dear, he must be a good man to have helped you out of your trouble. If you promised him a bride for doing so, your word must be kept." It was a pity that Bearskin's face was covered with dirt and hair, for otherwise they would have seen how his heart laughed within his body when he heard these words. He took a ring from his finger, broke it in two, and gave her one half. He kept the other half himself. He then wrote his name inside her half, and her name inside his. He asked her to take good care of her piece. Then he took leave, saying, "I must wander about for 3 more years. If I do not return at that time, you are free, for I shall be dead. But ask God to preserve my life." The poor bride-to-be dressed herself entirely in black, and when she thought about her future bridegroom, tears came into her eyes. From her sisters she received nothing but contempt and scorn. "Beware," said the oldest. "If you give him your hand, he will hit you with his claws." "Be careful," said the second. "Bears like sweet things, and if he takes a liking to you, he will eat you up." "You must always do what he wants you to," continued the oldest, "or he will begin to growl." And the second added, "But the wedding will be merry, for bears dance well." The bride-to-be said nothing and did not let them irritate her. Bearskin, however, travelled about the world from one place to another, did good wherever he could, and gave generously to the poor that they might pray for him. Finally, at dawn on the last day of the 7 years, he went once more out to the heath and seated himself beneath the circle of trees. Before long the wind began to howl, and the devil stood before him, looking at him angrily. He threw Bearskin's old jacket to him and demanded the return of his own green one. "We haven't gotten that far yet," answered Bearskin. "First of all, you have to clean me up." Whether the devil wanted to or not, he had to fetch water and wash off Bearskin, comb his hair, and cut his nails. After that he looked like a brave soldier, and was much better looking than he had ever been before. When the devil was safely gone, Bearskin was quite light-hearted. He went into town, purchased a splendid velvet jacket, seated himself in a carriage drawn by 4 white horses, and drove to his bride's house. No one recognized him. The father took him for a distinguished colonel and led him into the room where his daughters were sitting. He was given a seat between the 2 oldest ones. They poured wine for him, served him the finest things to eat, and thought that they had never seen a more handsome man in all the world. The bride-to-be, however, sat across from him in her black dress, without raising her eyes or speaking a word. Finally, he asked the father if he would give him one of his daughters for a wife, whereupon the 2 oldest ones jumped up and ran into the bedrooms to put on splendid dresses, for each of them thought that she was the chosen one. As soon as he was alone with his bride-to-be, The stranger brought out his half of the ring and dropped it into a glass of wine, which he handed across the table to her. She took the wine, but when she had drunk it and found the half ring lying at the bottom, her heart began to beat. She took the other half, which she wore in a ribbon around her neck, put them together, and saw that the two pieces matched perfectly. Then he said, "I am your betrothed bridegroom, who you saw as Bearskin. Through God's grace I have regained my human form and have become clean again." He went to her, embraced her, and gave her a kiss. In the meantime, the two sisters came back in full dress. When they saw that the younger sister had received the handsome man and heard that he was Bearskin, they ran out filled with anger and rage. One of them drowned herself in the well. The other hanged herself on a tree. That evening, someone knocked at the door, and when the bridegroom opened it, it was the devil in his green jacket, who said, "You see, I now have two souls for the one of yours."
So what did you guys think of the ending?
I thought it was very strange. I can see why it's kind of clever, but at the same time, I think these women are very strange for deciding to kill themselves because they cannot marry this man.
Agreed.
I mean, earlier this afternoon, they didn't even know this man existed.
I mean, I guess it's based with a lot of the gender ideas of the time, isn't it? Like shame and women being ridiculous.
Do you think it's because if their younger sister gets married before them, it's a really big no for them?
Maybe. I mean, I got the sense. I think one of the popular opinions is that it was out of jealousy.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, but it is such an extreme reaction that it just doesn't ring true to me.
If I'm jealous of someone's shoes, I don't kill myself.
Maybe you're just not invested enough in shoes.
If I'm jealous of someone's husband, I don't kill myself.
No.
It's like,
I didn't love that bit of the ending. I thought that was weird. And I don't really understand it, except from, I guess it comes from the fairy tale moral place of if you behave badly, aka not fulfilling your duty to your father, you will inherently be punished, is the only explanation I can think of.
Yeah, they were punished because they didn't care that Bearskin helped their father.
Yeah.
When you said you liked the ending, were you talking about the line where the devil says he's got two souls instead of one?
I was, yes. I absolutely loved that as a final line. I thought it was a great twist because it made me consider the devil's behaviour throughout the entire story. Because did he actually want Bearskin, or was it a trick all along to get more souls than he thought he was going to get? Just because normally in fairy tales which involve the devil, and there's really quite a surprising amount of them, though perhaps not surprising given their moral stories, the hero defeats the devil and the devil kind of slinks home shamed and outwitted, which is obviously because of the moral function of fairy tales. So obviously the entire point is that the good behaviour or the cleverness of the protagonist triumphs over evil. However, because he's often so easily defeated, it always irritated me, because A, that's not how you write a decent antagonist, and B, because it makes him seem like the devil, and so evil as an extension is just stupid or easily overcome. I think anyone who's lived in current life or looked at current events knows that's not true, so it just doesn't ring right to me. So an ending where the devil gets what he wants was far more resonant than like a black and white ending where the good wins and the evil is just stupid. Like, I don't want my heroes to win by default because that's just how the story goes. I want them to win because they're better.
that's interesting. I'm less familiar with fairy tales, and I kind of saw it from the opposite way. I was thinking, our protagonist just made a deal with the devil. Obviously, that's a bad thing to do, therefore he's doomed.
Look, it's very fast, isn't it? You make a deal with the devil, your soul is damned, there's no way out.
Yes, I assumed that this was going to be a good Christian tale where making deals with the devil was just a terrible idea, and it was going to be, the moral of the story was going to be, do not make deals with the devil.
Oh no, and a lot of the Brothers Grimm stories that I've read, I think, and one of the other ones I was considering, it was called The Devil's Grandmother. I picked it because, I don't know, the idea of a devil having a grandmother was just adorable to me. But in the story, these three brothers make a deal with the devil to be rich throughout their entire life. But at the end, they will serve him if they can't answer 3 questions. and the devil's grandmother ends up helping them by telling them, allowing them to overhear the conversation she's having with the devil so they know the answers to the questions. And it's just like, you just spent your entire life spending the money that the devil gave you, and then you faced no consequences whatsoever. You didn't win out of your own cleverness. You won because the devil's grandmother, helped you. It was completely opposite to this story, and I don't know, I guess I felt bad for the devil in that one because people didn't deserve to get away scot-free. So at least on this one, it kind of felt he's not a complete fool, even though I don't agree he should have got the girls because they did nothing wrong.
Fair. I have a counter interpretation. I think the devil is actually not very smart at all.
I don't like that. It goes against my view of I like him as an antagonist. I can believe it because he's often very dumb in these stories, but I don't like it.
I feel like the ending is trying to make you think that, oh, he planned this all along, and look how smart he is. There's a reason why I have trouble seeing it that way.
I mean, he did come and glow. It was kind of adorable.
Yeah. The main point for me is that when Bearskin has survived his 7 years, he reappears. But he's not like, everything is going according to plan. He is mad.
Yeah.
It's like he actually expected to get Bearskin soul, and then later on he's like, oh yeah, I planned it all along. Clearly he didn't.
To be fair, he's a disaster and I love him for it. I like my disaster. Oh, this is just what I planned all along, scrambling characters, because I feel like that's what I do.
Yeah, fair.
Did you also like his natty green coat?
He also has excellent style. I think it's very nice of him to dress up proper to meet up with his soldier.
Another point is, why would he so obviously be the devil? Why didn't he come in disguise?
It's not proper evil if you accidentally give up your soul.
I mean, if you wanted to trick him into signing some supernatural contract, you wouldn't be like, by the way, I'm the devil. He did make it very obvious. I feel like if he was actually being smart, he would have pretended to be someone else, just normal maybe, just a magician or something.
Who normal has a magic coat and makes deals? Clearly Bearskin knows his genre.
So we're agreed that the two souls the devil gets are the souls of the two girls that killed themselves and not the soul of Bearskin and his wife.
Yes, although I did think
Yes.
that originally. Well, I kind of thought about it for a second. I was like, no, wait, I understand.
Okay.
I
Agreed.
think it would have been better if it was Bearskin and his wife, but no, I think back in the day to commit suicide is to have eternal damnation, so
Yeah.
Commit a sin, yes, indeed. And they do mention the Lord's Prayer and being saved by God's grace, which I didn't quite follow because I was like, I thought you weren't allowed to say the Lord's Prayer. Does that
well,
mean
he
that
got
God's...
other people to say it for him because he paid them,
I
which is
see.
very Catholic. Pay your way into heaven.
But I do like that, I thought, the ending was happy and good and that he's got one over on the devil, but then the devil comes back and is like, aha, actually, I made good on this too.
It really is a weird story in which basically everyone wins.
I know, it's great. I mean, except the sisters, they don't win.
Yeah, but we hate them anyway. They're very bigoted.
I mean, they didn't really do anything. I thought their reaction was quite fair. If my father came up to me, you must marry this stinking man in a bearskin, I'd just be like, no.
The first one runs off screaming. The second one seems to think about it but says she'd rather marry an actual bear. Which I thought was funny.
I mean, a bear will demand less as a husband.
Wow. It's probably true.
Did you guys like the story?
I like it.
I really like it because it's so neat and tidy. The structure. It's beautiful.
Yes. And this is representative of fairy tales, right? They are basically entirely plot. They don't really mess around with description or character work very much. They're just plot.
At least the old ones. A lot of the retellings do a lot more with character. But that's almost as a subversion of the initial ones.
They tell us only what we need to know about the characters. That he's a soldier, that the girls are the daughters of a beggar, or a man who's fallen on hard times. It's just, it's so good.
Yeah, and this is a weird contradiction, I think, to how we tend to think about stories now. I think there's been more of a shift towards stories that are focused on the characters and making the characters feel real and acting like real people, and you kind of understand how the character's mind works. But the stories that have been around for a really long time and have been retold and retold and retold, they are just plot.
I mean, I think that probably would have been though because they're drawing on a lot of archetypes. So I think I read that at the time that the Brothers Grimm published this story, there were a lot of homeless soldiers around, and they were very concerned with their plight, which is why they presented the story in the way that they did. So the people who were reading would know already what that soldier was like. They would have met him. They don't need to like expand on the character. Like it's the people reading are putting themselves into the story, or their cousin or someone they know.
Yeah, these were stories that were told,
Yeah, like oral tradition.
yeah, that the Grimm brothers collected.
Like it's nowadays, you can say certain kinds of characters and people will instantly know what you mean. But I guess for someone like 20 years ago, or I don't know, 100 years in the future, all of our cultural references would need explaining in a way that we don't now. At least that's how I kind of think about their lack of character. Like they're trying to tell quite simple tales, and the characters are supposed to be well known, and they're archetypes, so that they can tell the story as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's shorthand. Tropes is shorthand again, isn't it? It's good though. I love that they can tell us so little and we still follow the story.
It's very pacey. It moves quickly. Other things about the style of it that you can tell it's a fairy tale. I don't know if this is something that existed before the Grimm Brothers or after, but things like lots of it uses the word however a lot, like so much. And the rule of three.
So the rule of three is something that's so Wikipedia says it's the smallest number you need to be able to form a pattern, which is why it's popular, but it's used everywhere. It's used in comedy, so the comic triple, it's used in speeches, political speeches. So the example on TV tropes, I think, was education, 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 which was in a famous speech by Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK. And there's just a sort of rhythm to that word, and it's good to listen to. It lets you establish a pattern, sustain it, and then break it, which I think is why fairy tales like to use it. And it can keep things short as well because you only need three.
Yeah, it fits well with the general structure of stories as well, with the three act structure. You've got your
Beginning, middle, end.
well, yeah, simply put, beginning, middle, end, as you said. So the three is kind of all throughout, I think, stories.
Yeah, even now, if you read a story, it will probably come up three books, trilogies, three films, film trilogies. It just is a thing in storytelling.
Like whenever I'm writing something, I always think of the rule of three. Like I'd never have them saying a word four times. It's always three.
Yeah, it's something a little bit magic about that number.
It does make sense to me that it is establishing a pattern and then breaking it or not breaking it or proceeding towards some conclusion, like the three sisters that gradually get warmer towards Bearskin.
There didn't need to be three sisters. There could have just been two.
But by having three, you've established a pattern. Whereas if you just had two, you have a sister who doesn't like him and a sister who does.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there is something satisfying about the progression of that.
But also, the younger sister gets such a poor lot. Like, I know it all works out well for her, but also, like, she doesn't have much choice in the matter, does she?
Well, it works out for her in the end.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to marry a bear just in case he happens to be rich.
But he looks good at the end. He looks handsomer than he ever has before.
He also made a deal with the devil, though, so how good a guy can he actually be?
I don't know, he stuck to his word for 7 years. That must have been pretty hard.
Yeah, that's true. And he did help the poor man out of the generosity of his heart, so.
And he's brave. He shot a bear, didn't even flinch.
True, was a
He
soldier.
even had time to make a weird one-liner about how he was going to tickle the bear's nose.
I know, what a guy.
Anyway, yeah, there's other hallmarks of the fairy tale style in there, which I thought was interesting. Like I mentioned, they used however a lot. It's like every point had to have a counterpoint to it. And there's obviously the once upon a time and then kind of the twist kind of ending. Are these things that come up as much in fairy tales as I think they do?
Well, Once Upon a Time clearly does.
They're all my favorite. Well, some of my favorite parts of fairy tales. The simplicity of the story and the things like the rule of three and a happy ending ish, I guess. They're all things that I like about fairy tales.
I don't know what it is about them that really gets me, actually.
What about fairy tales?
Hmm. Like, I know I love them, but I don't know what exactly it is about them.
Is it the fantasy elements?
There are lots of fantasy stories, though, and I'm not as obsessed with fantasy as I am with fairy tales. It's not even the moral aspect of it, because it's often not the moral aspect I really care about.
I mean, in some ways, you can see it as like the purest form of storytelling, right? It is just so stripped back.
True, but I often enjoy the retellings a lot more than the originals.
They're built on like a quite a simple but effective frame. They're all quite classic in terms of their structure, and it gives you a lot of room to expand on them because they are so simple. So if you like to reinterpret things, they're a good place to start. So, for example, when I was first faced with, oh, I want to write a novel, that scared the heck out of me. But if I then decided I was going to try and do a fairy tale retelling, that made life a lot easier. There's also familiarity with the stories because we tend to read them from a very young age, which is why things like, oh, Disney's doing a retelling of, or another movie for Cinderella. Well, everybody knows the Cinderella story, but there's still something nice about going and experiencing that new familiar story in a new way.
I just wish they'd do it in a new way. But anyway, that's a different matter.
I've seen a fair few new ways of Cinderella.
There are a lot in fiction, but like Disney have yet to pitch their.
Oh no, Disney won't do it.
Disney won't know. They're far too mainstream.
Yeah.
Have to have your blonde Cinderellas and all that. But yeah, they've done quite a few. Like I know the Cinderella is Dead is out, which I really want to read.
Yeah, I would like to read that. There was a book in our library which was Chinese Cinderella. I think it was literally called Chinese Cinderella as well. So that was obviously a new take on it. There's Ash by Melinda Lowe, which was adapted from Cinderella. Yeah, I'm sure there's more than that, but there's been a few different ones for Cinderella.
So I'm listening to a novel at the moment, In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Mercado, I think it is. I haven't got all of the way through it, but one of the things she talks about is the term archiving and what that suggests, and why queer people in particular, or anyone who's not in the mainstream, found an interest in the gaps left in our history because we don't talk about our stories. And there's something to be said about fairy tales and their negative space, like their oral traditions. So the fact that they've got gaps is very telling of the fact of what people considered worth telling and what they considered not worth telling.
Because they were oral stories, people would add their own little bits to them as well. You were free to add to them if you wanted to.
Yeah. You could change the ending. Well, you probably couldn't change the ending.
You might lose the moral element if you change the ending too much.
Do you feel that fairy tales these days have the same emphasis on morality as they used to? Like Girl, Serpent, Fawn, for example, is a fairy tale. Uprooted, Spinning Silver.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I wouldn't say that they had morals, I don't think. I think they're more using the setting and the character types and the sort of more magical elements from fairy tales rather than the moral aspects.
Said I think they often are still critiquing something. It's just that they're using the familiar setup to do so. Because the fairy tale story is already so familiar that you can subvert it.
Yeah.
Because people know what it should be.
Girls Made of Snow and Glass used the perspective of the evil stepmother in Snow White, so it's a Snow White adaptation, but they don't make her into the villain in that version.
Yeah, and they examine how the villain in Snow White would come to be so obsessed with beauty and what that says about our standards for women in society and the role of beauty with women in society at large. And I think that's the case a lot these days. I think Bearskin nowadays would probably be a comment on like homelessness and our stance towards money and capitalism and things like that. At the time, I think it was to do with the plight of soldiers who didn't have any way of making a living after they'd served their duty. But
so would the devil these days be wearing like a...
Excuse me, can we have a story called The Devil These Days? That sounds great.
That'd be great fun.
I was going to say wearing like a... I don't want to get us in trouble, maybe I won't say
I'll
it.
say it. I want to know now, I'm curious.
I was gonna say like an Amazon branded uniform or maybe like an Apple branded one. Give you infinite money, but you have to sign away your soul.
I mean, that just seems accurate.
That's not how they work. They don't give you infinite money. They take infinite money from you. It's very different.
I may have got this the wrong way round. I don't know where I was coming at it from.
To be fair, it would fit with capitalist society that the devil now takes your money. Instead, he promises you a happy, easy, convenient life in exchange for your goods, be that wealth or your soul. Like, under capitalism, the devil would no longer pay you.
Yeah, probably not.
So, what do we think of the sisters' fate in the story, or the treatment of women at large within the story?
I mean, if it were me, I wouldn't marry a strange bear because my dad told me to. They are there to be punished and rewarded and do not really do much else.
To be fair, I mean, they're not really people, are they?
No.
I mean, they still stand for something in characters. Like, Bearskin at least gets a line of dialogue. And the woman's not even... It's not about her desire, she's the reward for him at the end of his good behaviour.
I mean, they do get dialogue. But yeah, I can see that they're basically there for plot purposes. But it's weird to say that when most of the story is just that. There's not really much that's extraneous anyway.
There's that whole scene where, when he wins his deal, he gets the devil to, like, clean him in a bathtub.
Yeah.
So, like, if they're trying to be really economical with their word choice and what they're willing to include by not going very much into characterization, I thought that was an interesting scene to include.
True. I mean, I guess he needed to clean up. That's kind of an important part of the story. And getting the devil to do it is just one way of screwing him over.
So, I guess a bit more about the background of sort of folk tales and this kind of thing is that sometimes they were used to lecture young ladies about their conduct. And I could see that coming through really strongly here in that, you know, maybe don't judge that guy who's really like a bear because he might be a great guy.
I mean, I see your point, but also you could just not kill yourself. Like, what happens to the sisters was clearly their own doing.
I mean, yes, but it's not, we can't view it as, oh, it was the sisters' choice because it was a choice made by the writers and the storytellers.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
It's not the character's agency in the same way when someone else is picking what they do and how they behave.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Clearly the writers, who thought, oh, well, that's how the sisters would react, would be appropriate.
Women are clearly portrayed as hysterical and just like lesser beings in this story. I don't think that's up for debate.
I would agree. Like, the devil never stops to offer them a deal.
That's true.
I'm trying to think if I've seen any fairy stories where it's a woman who's offered a deal from the devil and that goes well. There's some where it's like with not the devil explicitly, but like almost fairy-esque creatures or creatures of power. Like there's one called Mother Holle, about this woman who falls down a well into a mystical land, but because she's kind and helps with chores, she gets rewarded with gold, but when her evil stepsister wants gold and therefore goes down the same well and is very lazy and wicked, she gets black pitch poured over her that never comes off for the rest of her life. So I guess that's kind of equivalent, but there's less of a sense of knowingly making a choice.
Yeah, okay. So we feel basically that women are not treated well in this text.
Yeah,
but that's fairly typical of olden day fairy tales, which I think is why it's such a popular genre for women to reimagine these days. Because it's what we're particularly fed, particularly with Disney, for example. But you're not given the same power to make them your own in the same way.
yeah. I mean, this was like 1812 or something like that.
Really glad I live in 2021 and not in 1812.
Never thought I'd hear anyone say that about 2021.
I know. If it was 2020, I might have had to think about it. So, I guess I wanted to talk about I think there is a little bit of a romantic element in here where the youngest sister sees that even though the Bearskin is a hideous bear creature who's hairy and dirty and horrible, there is a good man underneath because he helped her father. And, you know, personally, I would like to think that if I was having a bad time and I couldn't wash my hair, my partner would still look at me and be like, "You're a good person and I'm gonna love you anyway."
I mean, it's Beauty and the Beast in a different skin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, that story is crazy popular. I've seen it told and retold so many times that I just can't help but think there is something romantic about it.
Have you ever seen it with the opposite? No, with the gender switch, where it's the guy who falls in love with the woman despite her not being beautiful.
I don't think I have. I now hope that there's one out there that I could find because that would be really cool. Maybe you should write it.
The problem is that when the not pretty woman then magically turns out to be pretty after all, you've kind of ruined your story in that case, doesn't it?
I mean, it says something different. Like, you get all your makeover scenes in a lot of popular teen movies and things like that, but it's normally that the makeover happens before the love interest reciprocates interest.
I just feel like it's kind of different to be like, oh, he's not a lion guy, thank God. It's kind of different to say, oh, she's actually not ugly, hooray.
I mean, yes, there's different social connotations, but I was thinking, it makes a different kind of interesting take, doesn't it? Like, you've got different things to say, don't you? Depending on the genders you choose. Also, you could still technically have a feral lion woman.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, I don't think, like, it's hard to say that there's any element of romance because to me, romance is just is intrinsically a character thing, and as mentioned, there's very little character.
I can see a romance. Like you said, Mel, like there is something nice about the fact that she saw good in him even despite his appearances, and the whole waiting with the half rings was quite romantic.
Yeah.
But also, if I wanted to stretch, I could also easily see tension between the devil and Bearskin, so...
You're crazy.
I'm aware. My brain is primed to see romance everywhere, it's a problem. But also, washing someone is very intimate. I didn't need to include that. And he didn't, and then he comes up to him and gloats and he wears his special coat when he goes to meet Bearskin the first time. Like, he doesn't look like the devil, he's got his nice green coat on. And then he comes to his door when he's married to tell him, like, ha, I won. Like, he's clearly trying to impress him, or why is he so invested?
If you ever want to write Bearskin / the devil, I would read it.
I mean, you've made really good points, and I hate it. Please stop.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but there's more space is given to the relationship between Bearskin and the devil than it is to Bearskin and his wife.
You're right.
You've blown Matt's mind.
There's nothing more I can say on that. You're right. Yeah.
You're welcome.
So what is the moral of the story?
Keep your deals.
I mean, my mind keeps going back to the don't judge people on appearances moral, and yet that's not the whole story. That's only part of the story.
I think that's a substantial part of the story.
I mean, yeah, like, otherwise why would it be that specific deal unless the devil was making an assumption that people would be appalling to someone based on their appearance, and it's the good winning out that they don't. I mean, that and the money.
Yeah.
But if you really didn't judge people based on appearances, perhaps you wouldn't think he was the devil just because he had horse feet.
True.
You're right. The ending is what is throwing me. I don't know if it's trying to say...
I think it's like the devil moves in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
So even when you think you've won, someone else has lost. Because his wife has lost her 2 sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something about how even though Bearskin, for the whole story, only really does good, he still facilitated evil.
Yeah, and brought evil to their door. Because evil has a crush.
No. I could see it that way, and then I interpret it as kind of this idea of, like, there's always a little bit of evil in the good and yin and yang kind of story. That's how I see it.
Makes sense.
So even though Bearskin kind of wins his deal, please don't make deals with the devil because bad things will happen.
I mean, that's quite a literal interpretation.
I'm a very literal person.
I don't think anyone is in danger of making deals with the devil, personally.
You're all good to make deals with the devils in fairy tales as long as you win and you're clever.
Yeah. I was looking more generally, that there can still be bad and good intentions and vice versa.
That's true.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about these very interesting brothers. They were German, I believe.
Yes.
They did this weird thing. They didn't really write the stories. I mean, they did write the stories, but they went around and basically asked people for stories, right? They said, what kind of tales have you got within yonder village or something like that? And they would get a storyteller to kind of dictate them to them, and then they'd write them down. That's how I understand it. And they kind of standardized the style and things like that.
They were researchers,
Yes.
so they were studying folk tales and fairy tales.
They actually didn't really intend it to be like a form of entertainment. They were just researching.
Gathering them all up.
They thought it would have use for linguistic kind of studies rather than entertainment.
I mean, it explains a lot about the style, doesn't it? Because they're not writers, they're not embellishing.
Yeah, they've just got the basics down on paper.
But it seems like they did do quite a substantial amount of editing
Yeah.
to make them fit their ideals for kind of what the story should be, the kind of themes.
Yeah, apparently the story was a mixture of two different stories that they combined.
And they added like religious elements as well sometimes. They were trying to make something that would be useful in kind of understanding German history, I think. It's looked at through that lens. So some of the stories are perhaps changed slightly by that in ways that are somewhat subtle.
I think they rewrote some of them as well later on to make them a bit less horrible.
I quite like the fact they're horrible.
It was billed as like stories for children, but then some of them were really quite gruesome. So they got a lot of criticism for that. And they had to go back and readjust some of them.
And I guess people do want happy endings and some level of hope out of their stories. So maybe they don't want the devil winning at the end.
And,
I
well,
liked
it's
it.
not just that. There's other things like, they called it children's and household tales, but then they had things like in Snow White, it's like, I want you to kill my daughter and then bring her lungs and heart to me and I'll eat them and stuff like that.
Then again, that's assuming, I think it's very contemporary to assume that children can't handle dark tales to a certain extent. Like, children see dark things all of the time. Fairy tales are a way of knowing how to deal with them or to put them into a framework of understanding or, like, displacing them into a way that they can understand. Like, if you see horrible things happen and everyone always talks to you about, oh, everything is so lovely, you're just going to be so confused and have no way of processing your feelings.
It's a good point, but that's how it was. People weren't happy and they went back and changed them, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
They're also, the modern versions are changed again from what they changed them to, I think.
I think fairy tales are always changed to shift the time they're being written in.
The Grimm Brothers were from a poor background, but they still went to university. They didn't have the same privileges as a lot of their peers, but they were really clever and they sort of fell into folk tales by accident, which I think is interesting. I think they wanted to study law, but they had a professor who was very interested in stories, so they ended up doing this research project which took on a life of its own. The two of them were very close to each other. I think one of them was more outgoing than the other, so they balanced each other out.
That makes sense. If you've got a close sibling, you do end up compensating if you spend a lot of time together for each other's flaws or personality. For example, Fabs is very diplomatic.
Is she? Is that to make up for you being very bloodless?
That's to make up for me, yes.
Well, me and Matt probably have some sort of contrasting personality traits somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't think of anything.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
Anyway, during the last years of their life, they apparently spent all their time writing a dictionary, which seems like such a waste to me.
I guess they were interested in words by that point, if there wasn't a dictionary yet at that
They
point.
made this big German dictionary. They only got as far as the word fruit, so not very far. But it took them a long time. They're working on it for a good 10 years or so, I think,
Wow.
until they died.
Can't imagine working on a dictionary for 10 years.
God, it seems so weird.
I know, I think I'd go mad.
They were just really into those linguistics. It seems strange to us to go from storytelling to that.
I mean, you can see the link, at least, between storytelling and interest in
I mean,
words.
they both have words in them. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know if it goes much beyond that.
But the words you choose in a story, particularly if you've got such a limited scope of words, changes the story quite a lot.
I suppose in my mind they've gone from something very interesting to something quite dry.
I guess.
Maybe they weren't really interested in the stories themselves, but the way they were told.
Perhaps, but they kind of made them all fit the same sort of style, so in some ways they've removed that part of it, right?
Yeah. I don't know then. Yeah, writing fairy tales and then building a dictionary.
Maybe it's just what was paying.
Maybe. So, if you were to say you were going to write a short story, you wanted to write a fairy tale, which parts of the style would you take, and what would you change? Would you add more description, character?
I would add more character.
You think it's worth deviating from the style to get the character focus in?
Yeah, I think people nowadays want to invest in character. Character is what I'm interested in. I want to know why the characters do what they do and how that affects them. So that's the interesting part of the story to me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I think the structure of them is amazing. My stories just seem to ramble too much for me to get that perfect structure, or I get lost somewhere or go off on a tangent. The neatness to me is really attractive. I would like more character in them as well, because I've come to expect it and I enjoy it, and I'd like some more background on all these people, because even though in 1812 you'd understand the soldiers are like this and women are like this, I'd like to know, like, okay, please tell me more. I wasn't alive in 1812.
Yeah, and we don't get much of a sense of Bearskin's trials during that time, which means you don't get as much of a catharsis at the end when he wins.
Yeah, it really only tells you about him trying to stay at the inn and then trying to survive.
There's some emotion missing there, I suppose.
Like him trying to be a good guy and people just spitting in his face.
Yeah, a deleted scene like that would be good.
And it would make the bit where with the bride and sisters mocking him a lot more poignant and sad, because we'd feel a lot more on Bearskin's side, I think, because we know for sure he actually is quite a good guy.
So even though this is kind of a pure form of storytelling, it doesn't really fit our ideals, at least in the modern day. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
And I like story synopses to me almost more than stories sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
I would just like to give a shout out to my favourite line of the story while I'm here, when the second sister adds, "But the wedding will be merry, for bears dance well." I laughed at that. I have no idea what it means.
Such a strange line.
Because dancing bears come up a lot in fairy tales.
But why?
One sec. I'm going to see if I can find out why. And it comes up in modern retellings as well, but I can't work out where it initially comes from. Unless it's just that, bears stand up on their high legs and look like they're dancing sometimes.
Bears to me are too busy being like
Crowley.
Dangerous. I don't think I'd look at a bear rearing up on its hind legs and be like, "Oh, look, it's dancing. How cute."
I can send you a picture of dancing bears in the Finnish forest if you don't believe me.
I don't know, I'm just saying I'd be more interested in getting out of there alive, honestly. Halt! This is Matt from Several Days Later. I have found the answer to the bears dancing, and I will bring it to you via the power of editing. Apparently, back in the day, bears dancing was a kind of street performance. They would put a bear on like a hot plate and make it dance. It sounds horrible. Bad thing to do, poor bear. It was outlawed in 1911, but that's the answer. Past Matt may now do the outro. Alright, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. If you would like to contact us, you can do so via Twitter. I am at MattBWriter, Mel.
At Ficaholic.
And Simone.
At T_M_typewriter, also known as the modern typewriter.
Perfect. We'll be back with another story next week. Thanks again for listening. Goodbye.